Hello Grand Archive players, let's answer a rules question. What happens if you use Frostbind on 3 visits? Before we talk about this admittedly rare situation, let's first talk about Frostbind. There are many cards that can negate and banish a card activation, but we'll use Frostbind as a representative example. Also, for the video, we'll be assuming that the player allows a negate to happen rather than paying 2. When Frostbind resolves successfully, 2 things happen. Firstly, the target card activation gets negated. When a card activation is negated, by default, it is sent from the stack to the graveyard. Then, Frostbind moves that card to banishment. I want to emphasize that although this is a singular resolution, and neither player gets opportunity during this process, and state-based effects are not checked until Frostbind is finished entirely resolving, this process is nevertheless composed of 2 distinct game actions: negate, then banish. Now let's look at 3 visits. This card, along with a small population of other cards, has a particularly worded phrase on it: as it resolves. This wording has rules meaning and gives these cards special handling in certain situations. If a card with this wording would resolve from the stack or be negated from the stack, instead of going to the graveyard, it goes to the specified zone. This functions as a replacement effect that modifies the movement of the specified card during one of these game events. Note that replacement effects don't use the stack. Rather, they directly modify whatever game event they're looking for. So, if 3 visits was activated from hand and was negated by, say, an incapacitate, it would be sent from the stack to the graveyard. This is completely expected and normal behavior for a card activation. If 3 visits was activated from the graveyard and negated, its special resolution wording would move it from the stack to banishment rather than the graveyard. And if 3 visits was activated from banishment and negated, it would be sent from the stack to the bottom of the main deck. Note that 3 visits can be activated from banishment regardless of how it got there. There is no restriction on it getting to any zone in a particular way. Now, let's put it all together and use Frostbind on 3 visits activated from hand. 3 visits will move from the stack to its default destination zone, the graveyard, then be banished by Frostbind during its resolution. So far, nothing surprising. This is, again, completely normal card behavior. If 3 visits was activated from graveyard and negated by Frostbind, it will go from the stack to its destination zone, which is banishment. Then Frostbind will attempt to move it from its current zone to banishment. Since it is already there, that second part of Frostbind's resolution doesn't happen. 3 visits simply ends up in banishment. What if 3 visits was activated from banishment then negated by Frostbind? It will move from the stack to its destination zone, the main deck. Now, the main deck has a critical difference from the other zones we've mentioned so far, and that is that the main deck is a private zone, where all the cards in it, including 3 visits, are face down. After 3 visits enters this zone, the game is unable to keep track of it and so cannot perform the second action of Frostbind to move the card to banishment. Even though both human players know where 3 visits currently is, the game with its specific limitations cannot, and so 3 visits stays in the main deck. For more information on how the game handles movement in private zones, check out my video on Fail to Find. So, to summarize the interaction of Frostbind and 3 visits. If 3 visits is activated from hand, it ends up in banishment. If activated from graveyard, it ends up in banishment. If activated from banishment, it ends up on the bottom of the main deck. Let's look at a different example of a special resolution, the preserve mechanic. This mechanic is present on some Terra element cards. For non-object cards, such as this action Terrasite, it has the special resolution rules like we just saw, where via a replacement effect, the new destination from the stack is face up in the material deck. If you Frostbind a Terrasite, the Terrasite goes to the material deck when negated. Frostbind then tries to move it to banishment. You may notice that the material deck is also a private zone. However, since the card is face up, the game is still able to track it and successfully move it from the material deck to banishment. As a quirk of this, if you controlled an imbued internal magistrate, it would disallow moving the Terrasite out of the material deck, so Frostbind would be unable to move it, and Terrasite would stay there. These rules apply to non-object cards with preserve, such as actions. For object cards with preserve, the rules are actually a bit different. Rather than use a replacement effect that changes where the card goes when it leaves the field, preserve on objects moves the card from the graveyard via a triggered ability when it dies. This is likely to maintain interactions with dice triggers and so forth. Notably, this is a triggered effect and not a replacement effect. And even if it was, it only applies to objects with preserve going from the graveyard to the field, not from the stack in any way. If Frostbind negates an object card with preserve such as Meadowbloom Dryad, the preserve ability will do nothing to change this interaction. So, the Meadowbloom Dryad will go to graveyard when negated, then to banishment, just like an ordinary card activation. Also, note that cards like an Empowered Leeching Bolt do preserve themselves on resolution, but don't actually have the preserve ability. Being preserved is an effect of its resolution, and effects of resolutions do not happen if the card is negated. Unlike some of the previous examples, there is no replacement effect that would affect where it goes upon being negated. An Empowered Leeching Bolt, as well as cards with similar effects such as Nascent Blast or Whirlwind Threads, will go to the graveyard when negated as normal. Lastly, let's mention fizzling. You may have noted that these special rules only affect a card activation that resolves or is negated. If a card with this templating fizzles by losing its target when it tries to resolve, such as this Frost Shard activated from graveyard, this special resolution effect does not apply. Therefore, a Frost Shard activated from graveyard that loses its target will go to the graveyard as it fizzles, not to banishment. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.